on behalf of Lois, who has put this together, and Kelly, who's working in the background, may I welcome you. My name is Peter John Pearson. I'm the Director of the Parliamentary Office. Because we're recording, it is important that we actually give a fairly detailed bio so that people who will listen in future have an idea of who's speaking. And so please indulge me as I just share the bios of our two speakers with you. And if I sound a bit stilted, it's because I'm reading it. So thank you. Dr. Shaheda Omar, thank you for joining us this morning. And Shaheda is the director of the Teddy Bear Clinic for Abused Children, where she has been for the past 19 years. During this time, she has developed the professional standard of services offered by the clinic. She's well known and respected in the field of child abuse, and she is often asked to assist in challenging and controversial cases. Shaheda has driven the diversion program for young sex offenders since its inception and continues to take the program from strength to strength. Her work in this level of study adds to the literature and greater understanding of child abuse in South Africa, the diversion program in particular. Shaheda is also the author of a diversion handbook, Children Who Sexually Abuse Other Children. And Shaheda has formed a partnership with the Department of Basic Education, forming the official rapid response team to respond to crises on the ground. She has also formed a partnership with the Charlotte Academic Hospital Pediatrics Department and works in close association with the Medical Legal Clinic for Child Abuse. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Omar. Angela Katschke graduated as an art therapist from a German university in 1999. And since then, she's been working in psychiatric, psychosomatic, and psychotherapeutic medicine with all age groups. Anthroposophy has been her a source for deeper knowledge and guidance since 1993. Coming to South Africa, she specialized in the field of art therapy for traumatized children living in unsafe and unstable communities. Angela has founded the Butterfly Art Project in 2010, and our organization bringing creativity and healing through art to children growing up in marginalized community. She's developed several training manuals for community art facilitator training, and still oversees curriculum development. Curriculum development. So with those two bios firmly in our mind, we welcome them again and thank them for taking time out of their schedules to be with us. And without any further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Omar to address us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm humbled and I think privileged and feel blessed to be amongst such a wide group of people across the continent. And I would really like to say that it has been a challenging period for everybody. So, again, well wishes, strength to everybody, and strength to many families who are still in pain and trauma and suffering. Many are still suffering from this pandemic. As we work on the ground, we see so many children and families who have actually struggled and continue to struggle. So I am so grateful that, I don't know why it's not opening it. I'm so grateful that we have been asked to talk about the importance of play, because play is something that we often feel we take for granted, and it's what children do. It's not what adults actually engage in. And I think that is where we've fallen short, and we've realized how critical and important
Shaheda, we lost your sound.
Oh dear. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So what we found is that families and children were trapped in their homes. They were immobilized. And for many children, where home was supposed to be a place of safety, was actually not a place of safety. For many, it was a place of danger. We started getting referrals via, and these were delayed referrals, where children were brutalized, were physically abused, were sexually abused, and it was all within the home context. So despite the hotlines, the 24-hour toll-free lines, children and families and victims of gender-based violence did not actually have access to these resources that were available, that were made available by civil society, by government. The national gender-based toll-free line that is 24/11 available actually was not available to people because of their challenges within the home context. And home is the place of hope, home is the place of security. But as I said, it wasn't for many children. What we started seeing is that, of course, now children were, during the lockdown, unable to come in. I need control, it's not moving, the actual screen is not shifting. So what we found is that children were not able to actually report what was happening to them. Mothers were victims of domestic violence, and I think this was a huge challenge for many. What I want to actually speak to is that a lot of families were now in a position where they were sitting at home. They were now suddenly homeschooling, something that they were not equipped for, were not prepared for, were multitasking. So in many of the families, we found that they were in confined spaces. There was overcrowding. There were many challenges that they were struggling with, and we could not obviously access those people. I'm just having challenges. My screen is not moving, so I'm just checking quickly. It's not moving, the screen. I can hear me, but I can't, the screen's not moving.
Okay, it's moved now. It's taking a while.
No, it didn't.
Hi,
Okay,
Shaheda,
so,
I am sharing for you.
oh, okay, are you sharing for me, so I don't have to move on? Thank you so much.
Just say next, and then I'll be next.
Thank you. So what we, with the lockdown, we suddenly were faced with children who were, where we got referrals where a 10-year-old committed suicide, but the 10-year-old was the direct victim. The child was just struggling. There were so many questions, concerns, and the child did not actually have a platform to actually reach out and ask, because when we visited this neighborhood, it was a marginalized community where there was no actually recreational facilities available. The children were locked into their little confined homes, and the other children were all traumatized by this 10-year-old who on a Saturday night at 9 o'clock in the evening had hung himself. And of course the mother, single mother, was shocked and horrified, understandably so, could not understand, because she said her son never gave a clue that he was unhappy. But when we explored with the siblings, we found that actually this child could not understand what the lockdown was all about, that the child was actually confused, and the confusion led to trauma. And hence, because the child felt so powerless, helpless, resorted to measures which we cannot begin to even figure out. And of course, all the children in the neighborhood, when we went there, they were equally traumatized. They were indirect victims of this lockdown, of this pandemic. And when we explored, we found that these children, because they were locked in their homes, they could not even go outside. Fear of reprisal from law enforcement, from the police. And I think that is something that we need to also realize, that the reality is that this lockdown imposed a lot of sanctions and hardships on people, where they were not able to understand why this was happening. And the children were not able to, work this out, and actually not finding themselves in a position where they could talk about it. And that's what I think we need to look at, was the communication, the discussions around what was happening, because there was nobody there explaining. I think caregivers, parents were also afraid, uncertain, insecure. There was just a lot of challenges that they were struggling with. So I think we just need to understand what that play allows children to confront realities. We saw a 4-year-old girl where suddenly was having nightmares and said she was afraid to go into the bathroom. She was afraid to move into the next room, fear of darkness. And this was suddenly one of the manifestations of the pandemic. The one child would, come forward and say to the mother, "Don't touch me." She says, have you got corona? That's what she would say to the mother. And I think, these fears instilled a lot of challenges in terms of bonding, in terms of relationships, in terms of security. So next slide, please. If we can move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to look at unpacking different kinds of play to provide the knowledge and understanding of uninterrupted play, and to look at the benefits of play. I don't actually want to go into the theoretical frameworks, but I will. I know Angela has got lined up some very exciting information as well. Next slide, please. I think what is important is for us to bring awareness with regards to the importance of play. Why is it essential and contributes to the holistic well-being, physical, mental, emotional, and social aspects of the child. But I think we also need to realize that it's not the child. The child doesn't exist in isolation. The child doesn't exist in a vacuum. The child is part of a whole. And if the whole is healthy, if the child is healthy, there's going to be this mutual reciprocal feedback process. And this is where we experienced many difficulties with families coping, with children displaying disorderly behavior, disruptive behavior, children who were acting out sexually, who were also acting out physically. We had an 11-year-old who came to our medical clinic with multiple fractures, and actually the fractures were inflicted by a sibling. And I think, and it was during the lockdown period. And of course, the direct victim, the patient that we saw at our medical clinic, was not giving us the whole truth, but gave us a story that was not consistent and compatible with the sites of injury. However, as we followed up, we realized what had happened. So these, when we speak about holistic well-being, this is what we need to be aware of. And I think something that we often, when we look at play, I think a lot of the parents that we worked with during this period, a lot of them, highly qualified, certificated, and even those that were based at home, actually could not get back to basics. And what we were saying is getting back to basics and, feeling and healing through play. I think that was our message, is that the more they get back to the basics and engage with their children, not with expensive toys or not with sophisticated things, or that they didn't need to have those kind of tools with them or at their hands or access. I think the important thing was that there was just no need. One could use anything and everything inside and use daily experiences as well as part of play. Next slide, please. And I think, again, let the children play, and why play is vital. And I think what we learned, why play was so vital during this period, during the COVID-19. It's a basic, simple concept. And we know that play brings out the best in people. It brings out fun, the element of humor, there's pleasure. And it's something that you can stop when you want to. It's a voluntary thing. There's no sort of set timeline or compulsion about now it's time to play. Okay, we play, and now we need to stop within the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. I think that is something that we realized, that the impact it would have on families and what they needed to understand about the importance of play. But if we just look back and we all reflect on our childhoods, our days of growing up with our friends, our siblings, and family, and if we just remember how we played, it's not, and that as children, we were in charge of our play, not the grown-ups, not the parents, not the uncles, not the significant adults in our lives. And as we live, I think play has something, it's actually not a reality in many children's lives. What are children sort of subjected to these days? I find that the emphasis is on activities like the soccer, the gymnastics, the ballet, the baseball, basketball, music, swimming lessons. There's all scheduled times, it's fixed times, and people are on a tight timeline and deadline. Right, 2 o'clock, it's this, 3 o'clock, then it's your tennis, it's meeting up with the tennis coach. And then, of course, there are the screens, and there's very little time for play. I think the calendar does not just actually speak to free play, that let's just play, let's just do things spontaneously without all these scheduled activities that we are faced with. And I think when we look at parents' concerns and worries, and when they look at you, the anxieties that parents are faced with, they say, if we are saying that play is so important and children need to engage in play, the questions that are raised, what about the schoolwork? Parents may ask. What about routine? How do we manage this? And I think these are real concerns, real worries that parents face, and they actually don't know how to fit all this in and bring play into this process as well. Next slide, please. Another question that is often asked by parents, like they're going, I'm losing my mind, I can't cope. So their sanity, how are they going to deal with the children? And the question that often is, the surrogate caregiver is the screen. So for a parent, it's easier, rather put the child in front of the screen. That way I'm going to keep my child, I think, out of mischief, out of trouble, and then I can continue doing what I need to do. Because often we found that parents also had to work from home. Many of them were found in that situation where suddenly home became the workplace, the kitchen table became the desktop for their computer, etc. So I think, of course, these are things that we need to really factor into this discussion. And the important thing to understand is that we're all trying to work a workable balance, bring some semblance of order, balance, and normality in families' lives. I would just like to dwell on the acronym of PLAY, P-L-A-Y, play on the word play. If we can just look at the next slide, please. So P looks at problem-based learning. I think, why is play so important? And this explains that when children are playing, they're actually problem solving. They're working things out for themselves. Just look at a child in play, and you can see when they're doing anything, they using their hands, they're using their eyes, they're using all their senses and engaging in with whatever they're playing, trying to figure out or trying to do something with it, whether it's to make the puzzle pieces fit together, or to the tower block to stand, or to actually, when they're drawing, it could be anything, or putting the pebbles together, pulling the string or tying a knot, but it's all about them. The sense of ownership, the sense of power, control, this developing a sense of confidence that I can do this. So it's enabling, equipping the child, and it's building blocks for a stronger, better, secure future, but also that the child can move on to higher levels, higher forms of problem solving. The L is, of course, rich in language, when one actually needs to just observe, and often having worked with little children, the language they use and the role they assume in their play, you can see that they actually would assume language of a more sophisticated level, and of course even of older persons, whether it's adolescents or people older than them, and even that of adults. And I think I would just like to reflect on Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist, who said that, I quote, open quote, in play, a child always behaves beyond his average age, above his daily behavior. In play, it is as though he were, next slide please, as if he was an adult. And I think that's something that we need to realize, that play motivates, it enables, it equips children to grow, to develop, to thrive. If we look at the A's, it speaks to active environment. And active environment means that we are actually allowing the child a space, a safe space to actually get into, whether it's playing with the sand, whether it's getting their hands dirty. And this type of play is important for children. If we speak to many occupational therapists, they talk about the sensory stimulation, the tactile stimulation, where it enables children to, once again, in terms of their cognitive skills, their sensory skills, to thrive and develop. And of course, it will only help the child grow, in a multifaceted way. And I think adults need to ensure that they allow children the space and provide the materials. And it's once again, not expensive materials, whether it's sand, whether it's grass, whether it's any kind of things that the child could engage with and see. Allow the child that opportunity, because often I've seen parents who want to wipe their children, wipe their hands the moment they've come out of any playing with clay or with wet sand. It's almost as if like they need to keep this child clean. And I think that's again something that we don't realize, how important it is for the child to grow with engaging with different forms of material and activities. Y speaks to young children, and children, we know, are also children, are fellow human beings who have rights. And the one most important thing for me that stands out is that children have a right to play. We must never forget this. Next slide, please. Next slide. So again, if we just come back to, we know that how do children connect? How do they express themselves? How do they articulate what they're feeling and connect themselves with others and comprehend or understand what is happening around them? I think the best way for children to actually live through this, to find themselves in a position where they are able to express and understand and recover from whatever they've been faced with. And play is definitely an important avenue that would open the doors for them for that opportunity. So, of course, what are the benefits of play? And play is how children experience fun and joy. They build relationships. We talked about connection. We talked about the physical, cognitive, and imaginative skills, exploring the world. Of course, how do they explore the world? Through play and reaching out, through touching, through feeling, through smelling. That's how they reach out, and they continue reaching out from their internal world to the external world. Next slide, please. We talked about emotions. It's about exploration, but also roles, practicing roles, role playing, relaxation, the worrying issues, things that are worrying children. Often through play, they can, they would express themselves and work through those issues. And again, about the power and control, where they would be able to assume some sense of control over what is actually worrying them. What are they having nightmares about? What is this corona that they're afraid to go into the dark? What is this thing called death? Because we found that a lot of the children were asking about death. And one of the things that stood out for me was a 6-year-old boy who said, and was afraid of dying, and said, am I going to die? Is my mom going to die next? Is my dad going to die? They were overcome with this worry of death as well. And through play, we found that this child was actually able to express that fear, which he did not previously articulate. So I think these are the things that play would certainly allow children, but also allow them to conquer and champion their worries. Next slide, please. I think we need to also understand that, yes, play, we spoke about all the other benefits of play, but we also need to look at what does it actually do to the brain? What does it do to the body? So it, releases a lot of feel-good chemicals such as the dopamine and the serotonin levels. So the happy hormones that are released in the brain, and it makes children feel better. And I think these are the benefits to mitigate the impact of the virus. And that's something that we have found essential in reaching out. But I want to also appeal to parents and caregivers out there. So what other activities? Does it have to be formal play? I've mentioned not necessarily, but you can also utilize what you have in your immediate environment. So if you have a fence in your garden, or a wall to be painted, or a table to be painted, get involved as a family. If your child starts, we would find that drawing, and of course, sometimes using video games. I'm not saying that we need to move away from that, but if it's done together as a family, that certainly would be beneficial. And again, it's a way of connecting and bonding. But I also want to just remind people that sometimes you would find in times of crises like this, or any crisis, a child will move to a previous stage of development. So it may appear that your child is regressing and would start playing with things that may be more relevant to younger children. But I think this is just important to understand that it's very normal. That's, that they felt secure at that phase of development, and therefore they would engage in that kind of play. Next slide, please. The important thing is keeping routines in place, because often the question was, the questions that were raised with us were, what about routine? And that's something that we've emphasized, that's getting up the same time, eating the same time, getting to do chores around the same time. So there's predictability, there's certainty, there's stability in the child's life. So the child knows what to expect. And I think that would minimize trauma, would minimize anxieties, because a lot of the children we've been working with, that's one of the pressing things that we've had to deal with. Next slide, please. I'm not going to move into play therapy. I think Angela will speak more to that. It's just a medium of expressing their feelings, and of course reenacting whatever is sitting on a child's foreground. You find that whatever's sitting there on that front brain, they're likely to reenact that in their play, in their engagement. So, obviously that is important to allow a child that space, but that is in a more therapeutic context, and I'm speaking to general play, that outside of the therapy situation. Next slide, please. I think even this, children, we just need to be aware, and I'm emphasizing this over and over again, that with the use of inexpensive materials, we can allow children to just be and just have fun. That's the important thing. Use what you have. We don't have to go out and look and find toys, but use what we have. And I'll show you quickly as we go through. Next slide, please. And there's different types of play, creative play, nurturing play, modeling, instructive play, and they all contribute to problem solving skills, social interaction, emotional development, and release play. So releasing any pent up feelings or unsaid things, that it creates a platform to express and release. Next slide, please. And this is creative, is using arts and crafts, but if we can just move on, I would like to move fast so that I can show people all the different opportunities. Now, we thought, and we actually developed this, we sat with what we had, and during our 16 days of activism, we actually worked out a whole box of tools and games that one can use with children, and we came up with how African games can be used as a therapeutic tool for children, and again, from the games that we all played with and listening to people on the ground in the indigenous communities, we went back to those basic tools and play materials. Next slide, please. And as I said, it's easily accessible, no monetary cost. The materials are available. So what did we use? Waistons, old ropes, wires, and all sorts of creativities, using pebbles to actually tell stories. Next slide, please. So, these were pebbles that we picked up, selected, and we created these little bags where we, if you can see, it's speak out stone stories, and each pebble we got children to assist us in coloring the pebbles and then playing, throwing those pebbles or turning them at all on the other side where there's nothing colored or written, and then getting them to turn it around and then say something about each pebble. So I think these are just a way to tell a story where we would prompt the child, engage with the child, and I think something that we found very useful, and it was fascinating where some of the stories came out, and where one child said that I actually, the heart was about that I really miss my friend, and I cry every day for my friend because I cannot see my friend since school has closed, and we cannot phone each other because my parents do not have airtime, we do not have money, we have to focus on putting bread on the table. So I just think these are realities, but it was so poignant, it was so powerful, the way this child expressed and articulated herself. This red heart meant so much to her. Next slide, please. Hand games, I think, again, this game was used in the school holiday program. So we have holiday programs, and of course we speak to children about pro-social skills, safe and unsafe touches, and there was an 11-year-old girl, and however, she was not actually engaging, but through her non-verbal cues such as a grin and nod, she started engaging with the group. And on the third day, so she was more of a silent observer, not actively involved. However, we found that after the third day, this young girl started engaging and she started participating. So, they touch each other's hands, and there's a song and rhymes that they have say, and of course they are guided by a facilitator. But we found that children thoroughly enjoyed this and participated, and the ones that were very withdrawn, like this child, overcame that kind of withdrawn behavior. Next slide, please. With the wires where we got children and the tins, I don't know if you can see, those were cans that we used from soft drinks and string and wires that children used. We guided them, and they made this for self-entertainment as well. And this was actually used within the neighborhoods and informal settlements and townships that we worked with. Next slide, please. skipping game. I mean, how often it's so easy for any family to actually say, during COVID, I think people were faced with the problem of gaining weight as well, and eating carbs and not maybe having access to enough money. So buying, with the little money, buying, food that they could get maximum, whether it was the breads and whatever. And of course, weight gain, not only for the child, but for the significant adults as well. And skipping has many other benefits, not in terms of weight loss only, but releasing the happy hormones just everybody participating and everybody getting an opportunity, so the engagement, working and having fun as a family. Next slide, please. Well, DITINI, it's an African word, but and in Afrikaans they call BLIKKIES, the tins. You can see the pilchards and the other cans, and of course people throwing a stone and hitting, aiming for it. It's a competitive game and of winning and losing. And this would be ideal for a family as well, to play and have fun, and for children to be part of this activity. Next slide, please. The China rope, I'm not sure how many of you played this, but I as a child, where we had two people, one on either side, and you would jump in and out and on top, and so it requires of course one person, and the others would observe, and the points that are scored, etc. You could even use elastic. We used to use elastic, but string is also something that's available and accessible. And then throwing stones in the air and then saying something about it. So that's also something that as a family you could participate and enjoy. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think I've come to the end, but I just want to say that using these kinds of materials we found to be invaluable, that you actually don't, as a family, need to go out and find things, as I've said before. That play is such an integral part of a child's world. Firstly, it not only assists them in their cognitive development, cognitive growth, and their personal growth, their sense of self-worth, their sense of self-belief, that they can do things, and that they are recognized and validated when they play. So their contributions are meaningful, are valuable and appreciated. And it certainly facilitates social engagement, the social skills, but also one important thing is that the resilience, that there's an element of fun which instills a sense of hope, and that when there's hope, there's resilience, that we will come through this together. We are a family, because what are the nuances, the implicit messages that we are a unit, we are a family, and we're going to stay together, and we are supporting each other, and we are recognizing each other. I think, we need to be aware that it provides lots of opportunities for healing, and that is something we've realized and learned through this process, and we continue to learn that through play children feel and heal, and getting back to basics is something that we all need to be aware of, that we don't need to go out to the fancy shops or to say, where do we begin, how do we start playing with our children? We can just utilize whatever we have in front of us to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaheda. Thank you. That was an incredible overview. I've made so many notes, and I'm deeply grateful for those many insights. I'm not going to allow for questions of clarification now. I think we want to hear Angela's contribution in its fullness. So I'm going to ask you to hold on to your questions. You can, of course, put them in the chat box, but there will be time after Angela's contribution. So thank you again, Shaheda. And Angela, can I ask you to address us now, please?
Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be with you. Thanks, Shaheda, for giving such a big picture around play, starting, describing the circumstances children found themselves over the past month and even 1.5 years, which is shocking. You know, I could feel how my being was just shrinking up, and we do all know about that, but to hear that one story after the other from a frontline worker in that field brought like a reaction in my soul, and I'm sure in all the attendees' souls as well. I would like to share a little bit about the Butterfly Art Project and the work we're doing. And I brought a video along about trauma in childhood. And I actually think we start with the video, because that video is going to help us to just digest once more what Shaheda was sharing with us. So I will start with that. Can you see the video? I hope so.
We are all traumatized.
Yes.
Good.
Trauma in our soul is caused by an event that overwhelms us. Our thinking, our ability to feel, and our will are no longer in balance, and our being becomes disorientated and dysfunctional. Traumatic events happen every day in children's lives. Domestic and gang violence, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, illness, death of a beloved one, accidents, natural disasters such as floods, storms, and fires, loss of a home, acts of war, poverty, and many more. We respond to emotional shock with flight, fight, freeze, or camouflage. An ancient survival mechanism in which the amygdala, a small area in our brain, sends out the command to protect ourselves. Our heart beats faster. We breathe faster to pull more oxygen into our lungs. Our muscles fill up with more blood, and we start sweating to cool us down. This is all preparation for enabling the human body to survive a threatening situation. Depending on the level of available inner resources, we can digest the traumatic event and return to normal moderately quickly. If we do not have these inner resources to digest the traumatic wound in our soul, we can't heal. Vulnerable children and vulnerable communities lack these resources. Anxiety, anger, loss of control, re-experiencing the trauma in flashbacks, nightmares, trouble falling asleep, changed appetite, headache, stomachache, vomiting, bedwetting, and loss of trust are normal reactions after traumatic events. Unhealed trauma manifests itself as us continuing to experience these symptoms, even if in a safe environment. At the Butterfly Art Project, we offer children safe spaces to build the inner resources to deal with trauma by using art as a medium and to prevent post-traumatic stress disorders and its associated symptoms. It is all of our responsibility to create safe spaces for children and adults where survivors can experience rhythm and routine to stabilize, conversation for sharing feelings and stories, the sharing of information around the traumatic event to prevent feeling guilty for what has happened, and most importantly, for free expression by playing together, creating art, or creating a ritual for healing.
Good. There we are back. So the Butterfly Art Project tries to give children a space where they can build up resources to deal with the daily trauma they're experiencing. There was trauma before the lockdowns, and of course, the lockdowns and the pandemic just increase the amount of trauma and the burden on young children and adults. It's not just the children, it's children, youth, adults, seniors, everybody. We started serving children in preschool age. That was like 11 years ago. No? Building up inner resources to be actually free to learn and be able to go to school and to learn. If your little brain is busy digesting what you have experienced and working through traumatic events, you don't have the capacity to learn and to thrive. So that's how we started, and we developed then for different age groups, different children programs. And in 2016, we formalized a training for adults. We designed a couple of training modules. We got 12 by now, and we do have different mentoring methods, how we mentor our CAFs. We have been trained CAFs, our community art facilitators. We do have currently 242 community art facilitators on our data list, and we can proudly say that 119 have been active in their community, about 100 different communities in the Eastern Cape, not in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape in Gauteng. And they reach out to nearly 6,000 children. So it's a huge reach, and it contributes to stabilizing children in these very, very, very difficult times. Yeah, that's what we do. We've got an art center of ourselves. That's where we started 11 years ago in the community of Vrygrond, where we see about more than 200 children every week for a healing art class. And in these art classes, it's very, very important for us that there is, I think it was called by Shaheda, routine. No? We call it rhythm, so that the children come and they experience in a welcome circle each other, and they start with a song or a prayer, or a song and a prayer and a little game. And then they do go into the art activities. They have, after creating, sometimes together, but often also on their own. It's a time where children who live in overcrowded households with very little space for privacy, where they can experience privacy, and that's essential to develop a sense for myself, that I have a space where I can say, this is just me. So if they have a workspace and there is, there are art materials laid out for them, nobody's allowed to touch what they are doing. That's very, very important. And after the art activity, there's a time to review, to see what happened in the other children's life, and then there's a farewell circle. So that's a very strict routine. We call it rhythm, through an art class to help the children. Back to play. You could see in the video that there are different ways to help children through trauma, and being creative is a way of playing. But I would like to talk about free play. I think free play is essential to childhood, and that means one doesn't need materials. It's lovely to have some cloths to dress up and have some natural materials, or even some toys, whatever, but it's not needed. Free play is happening in the moment. It's happening with other children, and it's a way to express my very own being. And in that expression, the same thing happens like an artistic process, that you build inner resources, you can digest what is happening in your life, and you can work through traumatic events. And the role of the adults watching free play is to witness, and to for the one reason to find out, is there danger in that child? Does it need to be supported? And and the other reason is to create a deeper understanding of children. As long as children sit with traumatic events and they can't make sense of what happened, the little brains will keep busy trying to make sense and understand what happened. So adults can be crucial in like interfering, supporting the free play by sharing information or guiding a little bit to make the children understand what actually happened. Of course, in a child language, it can't be an adult language, needs to be child age appropriate. Yeah, what else? I think we got like half an hour left, and I would actually prefer to step into a space of conversation and listening to our attendees' questions and find conversation, because I could just carry on for another 3 hours, but I think we should give space to really get to the points and answer questions why people actually came and pitched on a Tuesday morning to our webinar. I'm sure there's a lot burning and many questions waiting already.